Stuff.
Yes, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to say a few words and contribute to the seminar. Very timely as it is, because I think we're heading into a period pre-general election, whenever that may be, that is going to be quite critical in terms of how the competing parties lay out their agenda for the justice system. And of course, probation has a very important role in that. And I want to thank you, Lord Fred Ponsonby and Sir Bob Neal, for the support you've given to Napo and the probation trade unions over the past few years for our work in keeping the campaigns going to get probation back into public service, which it is, but sadly still not at the place where I'd like it to be, but I'll cover that shortly. So again, welcome to all of you. I've just got 3 points I'd like to cover in my brief address, and you've got them up on the screen. Thank you. So, and this was partly alluded to in some of the dialogue I heard earlier, we've moved from a gold standard award-winning service to one that is still in crisis, and that really is hugely disappointing. I joined Napo around 2008, and the idea of part privatisation had not quite stuck. There had been a few experiments in the offing around unpaid work. But history shows what happened. I'm not going to rehearse all of that. What happened was a decimation of the service in terms of part privatisation. Napo was in distinct opposition to that. We didn't win that campaign, but I think the way we ran that campaign made it clear that this was a long story. It would be an attritional campaign over many years. And we've gone from what was, in my view, even as an outsider, a really, really good localized service to one that was pulled apart. And we all had to work very hard to get it back to anything like its former self. So we are where we are. We have the service back into state control. Obviously, I'd much rather that be the case than where it was. But the egregious damage inflicted on the profession and its staff is almost too much to quantify in the time available. And still people are feeling very bitter about what happened. It meant that many experienced staff left the service around about 2013, 14, 15, helping to cause the staffing crisis, both in the community rehabilitation companies that were set up and the National Probation Service. And my criticism is not about all the staff that worked in either entity, not at all. I know them to have been hardworking people trying to make the best they could. But the political decisions that underpin that were dreadful in our view. You'd expect me to say that, so I will. So we've got a lot of we've got a lot of work to do to bring the system back. Consecutive reports from Majesty's Inspector of Probation lay bare the inadequacies in the current service. And time again, we see very critical reports about where we are and what needs to be done. I'll leave you with a thought on this, that there are 32 out of 33 probation delivery units either rated as inadequate or in need of serious improvement. That's not good enough. That is just not good enough. And it's not as if we've had a couple of years to think about this. This work, preparation for bringing the service back and making it better should have started a while ago. So what are we doing about it? We being the probation trade unions and we being senior management in the probation service. And you'll see the backdrop there, Operation Protect, which may on the face of it seem a tad adversarial, but it's not. And what we want to do and are trying to do is work with senior probation management and cross-party politicians to get across the fact that the service is in dire need of improvement. And in fact, there's another way forward, and I'll come to that at the end. We need to work together to identify the root causes of excessive workloads and the stress and the burnout that's occurring. And we just can't continue with the present regime as it is. So we're looking to see how we can work with senior management on a joint basis. We've created a number of joint working groups. They're going to delve down into everything to do with recruitment in probation, communication within the service, diversity in a service. There's just been a new project launched with the help of King's Council that's going to have an in-depth look at the standards of discrimination, racism, bullying that exist within the service. and kind of do a proof check on that. Very important, particularly on the basis that a fairly recent report from HM Inspector Probation laid bare the problem of racism in the probation service. I mean, I shook my head. I was aghast at that when that was published some years ago, because we rarely see that sort of thing manifest itself out in the public. But the feedback from staff, speaking in confidence to the inspectorate, was alarming. And again, on that one, we worked hard to look at the issues identified and put together race action plans. So we're doing work. That's another example of what we're trying to do jointly to address problems. It's not all about an antagonistic campaign. So we hope we can identify solutions. One of the things we are doing at very high level now is to look at the impact if the government's proposed policy of presuming against short prison sentences comes to fruition. What can we do jointly with management to ease the burden on hard-pressed staff in terms of the work they currently undertake? And two areas we're looking at specifically are the way in which we can identify what works best in terms of rehabilitation activity days and post-sentence supervision. No surprise there. There are many aspects of post-sentence supervision which our members find hugely bureaucratic, time-consuming, and taking them away from the very real job of focusing on public safety. So more on that will follow in due course. We're at early stage yet, and a lot hangs on government policy and how that works out over the next few months. But finally, just in terms of this address, we need probation back into our local communities. No surprise there. That's where it was. That's where it needs to be. The public that we serve needs to know what we are doing and needs to have a stake in our activity. And we don't believe 1HMPPS is going to help in any respect. We don't think it does anything for frontline staff at the moment. It creates a new stratum of super managers, area executive directors, which we're not convinced are going to help the current crisis. And to us, it's all about embellishing an already prison-centric HMPPS. We need strong leadership at political level, and we're going to have an election, and we will wait to see which government comes out of that, or which government is going to take the very, very brave step to perhaps recreate probation trusts in a similar form to the ones that existed before. And as far as Napo is concerned, we don't think it would cost a lot of money to use the existing regional probation setup to turn those into community trusts. Wouldn't need huge restructuring, wouldn't need reskilling, but it would allow us to get back and develop those partnerships with local providers. So happy to try and answer any questions on that, Lord Fred, and anything else I've said in the past few minutes. But again, thanks very much for your time and for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. What I'm going to do actually is go straight on with the next two speakers, because we've got 20 minutes for questions for all three of you after the next two speakers. So just sticking with the agenda in front of me, and it's Harry Annison who's next. And Harry, perhaps you could pick up the point you raised in the Q&A as well. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, that's
perfect. Let me make a start then. And yes, I'll pick up that point a little later. And Laura and I have agreed to switch the ordering of our talks for anyone wonders. So I'm Professor Harry Annison at Southampton Law School, and here today I'm speaking specifically to our Rehabilitating Probation project, which is a 3-year ESRC funded independent research project, and we're just entering our third year, so we're a little bit more than halfway through, so we'll in some ways be a little bit tentative with what we're saying, although there's a number of free to access publications in the world already that are more robust about what we've been able to analyze so far. I'm not sure if I can control the slides myself, whether I need to ask them to go forwards, but we'll just need to go forward to the next one if we can, please.
Hi, Harry. You should be able to take control of your slides.
Perfect. I'll let's do that then. Thank you.
Take control button.
So this just shows the. Oh right. Okay. Let me do that. Sorry. Every day's a learning day, isn't it? So this just briefly shows people the team that we have, and what I just want to highlight is the graphic towards the bottom there, which shows the range and the breadth of the probation practitioners and stakeholders that we're engaged with, and so we're conducting hundreds of interviews across these different domains in 3 annual sweeps. So hopefully I've just moved forward to the next slide. So what I want to do is begin by highlighting some positives, really, which I think is important to do. So what we've really been struck by is through our work is finding a high degree amongst our respondents, really practitioners, but also at the regional and national leader level, of considerable resilience, albeit of course there's an area of element of self-selection there, given the attrition challenges within probation. And a general feeling really that unification was what we could call, and what we called in our first academic publication on this, a painful but necessary journey. That was a quote from a practitioner. And this really underpinned by a considerable commitment to the idea of probation, that it had to be something that persisted, and we've seen that already with speakers, I think. We found through our research variability in reported occupational identity, which seems to be more variable recently. So in other words, a commitment to what specifically the general idea of probation, the specific office that one is working in, for example, to the more general organisation of HMPPS, for example. And of course, as Phil's already alluded to, the actual roles within probation dramatically vary and connect with different philosophies of punishment, if we could put it like that, whether that's supervising unpaid work and punishment, or whether that's the more central supervision role. Just give 2 examples. So hopefully this will move to probation in transition. Change trauma is a major theme in our findings to date, so the considerable impact, the cumulative and compounding dynamics of both transforming rehabilitation and unification, and the really long-standing reverberations. And I think that speaks to what's already been highlighted about arguments about potentially the need for further structural change, but also the concerns and the dangers around doing that. What I was going to, so I think the debates around 1H and PPS is one example of this. This is where I was just going to, I think a tiny bit of clarification is useful, and it may just be the language is so similar, maybe misunderstanding what Phil said earlier. But of course, as part of the unification, several years ago now, probation became part, or the whole of probation became part of HMPPS. As Ian alluded to, what's happened more recently, so publicly from the autumn of 2022, is the development towards what's been known as 1H PPS, primarily with the addition of these area executive directors that span probation and prison. Now, many of the people on the call will know that from a HMPPS view, if you like, then this is a really top level change, which is trying to both link probation and prison more effectively in terms of management, but really trying to protect the practitioner core, if you like. But I think this is an example through our research that we see of that change trauma, that is perceived to be another upheaval, that it's seen in that way of another structural change that needs to be undertaken. Recruitment is of course a key issue, as well as retention. So we've identified considerable enthusiasm and a stated desire for a long-term career in probation amongst others PQIP trainees. But equally, of course, there are challenges around training, mentoring, and the lack and the limits thereof, and that speaks to the workload pressures that have already been mentioned today. There are challenges more generally, so around training and support for PSOs in particular, and our research also really resonates, and our findings therein, with the recent HMIP report on the considerable pressures facing SPOs. I think one thing that's important to highlight in terms of practitioners is again the reverberation of serious further offences, so SFOs. Across the service and in different local offices, some very sort of violent language really used in many cases to talk about the way that this was really experienced as impacting on staff really, and cultures within local offices. And this was really notwithstanding the actual location or dynamics around specific high profile cases, that these were experienced across the nation, certainly in our case study area, even though the actual SFOs may have occurred somewhere away or in different circumstances. So I think the confidence is really an issue, which I'll come on to In a moment, the final point is around institutional memory, and of course, with the retention issues that are going on, those pose significant challenges. And Phil pointed to those earlier about the need to be able to hand on that institutional memory through ongoing practice and relationships. And finally, I just want to highlight questions of looking to the future of probation. Really, one thing that we've been struck by in our research is the considerable goodwill amongst stakeholders towards probation, so from the courts, from police and many others. But this really requires substantive underpinnings. So the goodwill that we've identified is often as much about shared values or the perceived specific role that probation does play or can play within the wider system, rather than necessarily being a sense that probation are currently successfully meeting those hopes or expectations of stakeholders, and that can only endure for so long, really. So of course, well-trained and confident staff are needed. I think our research points to some challenges around there, which are really I think in shorthand are reinforcing some of the issues that have already been highlighted by our speakers today, with manageable workloads. That really is a crucial issue. And again, as has been highlighted today already, the care around probation not operating as merely as a prison population safety valve, and amongst other things, overcoming what risks really becoming an embedding and an embedded culture of fear, as was highlighted by the HMIP thematic on SPOs recently. And I'll leave things there.
Thank you very much, Harry. I think we'll move straight on to Laura Janes, Dr. Laura Janes. Laura, do you want to pick up and carry on? Thank you, Laura.
Good morning. Thank you very much
Morning.
for me. I think I just wanted to start off by saying that I'm hoping to provide a slightly more user focused experience here as a solicitor that represents a range of people who are subject to probation experience, and been doing that for the last sort of 20 years. Obviously, everything that I've heard talked about this morning is very all too familiar, but the impact that it has on the lives, hopes and experiences of the people I represent just simply cannot be underestimated. And of course, a fantastic probation officer is really one of the most important things that a person can ever hope for. And there are still many of those about, but I don't underestimate how difficult it has become to do that job. So hence the title of my presentation, An Impossible Job. And I think just thinking back a little bit about how the role has changed, I was watching the old, and I know ITV drama is very important these days in public life. And one of my favourite things ever is the series of The Probation Officer from, I think it's from around the 60s, and it features, you can probably just see there in the bottom, the lady probation officer, Honor Blackman, who was rather spectacular. But really, what that really focused on was that traditional old-fashioned idea of advise, assist and befriend, and it just showed this incredible development of relationships between probation officers and the people they were supervising, situated sort of in the wake of World War II, where often probation officers had been shoulder to shoulder in the trenches and in the services with those people they were supervising. There was this very strong common thread of humanity running through that series. And of course that focus has understandably shifted so much more to public protection today. But what this drama really shows is actually how important that friendship was for public protection, and how that kind of quality of personal relationships really was one of the best ways to help people genuinely turn their lives around and desist from offending. And which brings me really, as a lawyer, I can't resist, of course, sort of banging on about the law for a little bit, to the kind of statutory purpose of probation. And I think this is something that we don't think about often enough. We go back to the strangely named Offender Management Act, as if there were only one offender. That would make our lives a lot easier. But probation purposes set out in Section 1 of that Act. You can see there the demands on probation, to give assistance, as we talked about just now, in terms of the appropriate sentences and important decisions about people's lives, looking at supervision and rehabilitation, dealing with people on remand, and information for victims. It's a huge spectrum of things that one is expected to cover. And one of the things that I find about the role from looking at it from my client's point of view as a practicing solicitor is, as I said earlier, not only can probation officers play an absolutely critical role, but it's one that's so important because quite often freedom hangs on the quality, consistency, and resources available within that relationship. So often I will be in a parole board hearing, and one of the things we are testing is not just how much my client has changed, but the quality of the relationship with probation. Is the person open and honest with probation? Do they have a trusting relationship? Will the probation officer be able to pick up on those small warning signs that risk is rising, which might relate to their thoughts, their sleep, their appearance? And so these factors are so critically important. And when I listen to Lawrence talk about the decimation of probation, and to Phil talk about what an unhealthy place we're in, how are probation officers expected to develop those quality relationships that are so crucial in this environment? So clients, interestingly, often talk about whether or not their probation officer likes them. And it's something we don't talk about very much as professionals, but actually it's one of the most important things, because everybody is human. And if people feel liked, appreciated, they're going to be much more likely to be open and to share that information. It's critical for public protection. And I think those interpersonal relationships cannot be done in the flash of a moment. They take time to establish, and they need resources. And one of the things that I find most difficult, particularly I work a lot with child lifers, so people who got indeterminate sentences as children, some of whom I've been working with for up to 20 years now, some of whom had those IPP sentences. And, they're still dealt with under OMIC, which means that they may just see their inside probation officer, once or twice for the purpose of writing the parole report. There just isn't the time to get to know the person. And of course, that relationship will then not continue into the community. So, I sometimes meet probation officers who have caseloads of over 50, 60 clients in custody. And that's just not feasible. So we all know desistance, somewhere to live, something to do, sometimes someone to love, also very important. But so many people under probation, of course, fall under that very first hurdle of not having somewhere to live. And I think one of the huge problems facing probation today is this huge reliance on other statutory services. We've heard in the last few weeks how councils are reeling, councils going bankrupt every other week with the pressures in public life providing housing and support. Yes, we've got a few more approved premises in the last few years. Yes, we've got the CAS-free accommodation, but it's all temporary, 8 weeks in an AP, 84 days or whatever it is in a CAS-free. And I am so sad and tired seeing clients who've got every hope of success fall when that accommodation falls through, and they're homeless, mental health crisis, and all the rest of it. Two stories are important. 2 examples to leave you with. A woman I represented recently in custody with her child. She was eligible for release on home detention curfew. She could have benefited hugely from the extension to 180 days, but it took several months longer than it would have done had she been a man, because the probation services were heavily reliant on housing authority to find a place to live and children's services to do the appropriate assessments, and the service could not get it together. And in the end, we had to find a charity that was willing to take her, that would be a sort of all-encompassing process. But what we would have done if that charity hadn't existed, I don't know. She and her baby would have spent a lot longer in prison. Another young man who was recalled to prison after serious mental health breakdown in the community, could no longer live with his mother, couldn't access his own housing, back in prison on an IPP, and the wheel goes round. So I just think I want to end really with that huge issue, that it's not just, we have to see this in context. It's not just probation alone. They can't do it alone. If we want to achieve true public and assistance, we need to bring other services in, and they need to cooperate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, that's absolutely right from my experience. I did have a period when I was a youth magistrate sitting on what's called a troubled families committee, and this was specifically about placing young men usually coming out of custody. And the whole point of that committee was it was cross-borough and it was cross specialism. So that included housing, health, education. Everybody got around the table specifically thinking about what was most appropriate for those young people coming out of custody. It was good, but what was the tragedy? As soon as that troubled families money ran out, the committee disbanded. So my experience of that is I absolutely appreciate what you said, but it needs a pot of money for people to focus on, for them to actually get working together as they showed. It's a sort of a bit of a, that's my experience of that anyway. Right, so questions. We've got 20 minutes. Have we got 20 minutes for questions? Great. So the one I can see immediately on my screen is from Anne-Marie Wills, and I'll read it out. It says, I'm a careers advisor for Careers Wales, based in a prison establishment linked with probation and approved premises. What support is available for other prisons in England is a similar support. Careers Wales are based in every Welsh prison, also in women's prisons. Anybody comment on that? I don't know the answer to that one, actually. And there may be other questions, but
well, I mean, based on my own experience, I would say that it's a real hodgepodge across the estate, and what you have is, in some places like Achieve Northwest, for example, do some fantastic work, bring employers into prisons and do interviews and things like that, but it's very much a hodgepodge. Yeah,
that's my experience as well. I'm just going to go through this list, and I mean, Ian and Harry, please jump in. Mm-hmm. So I'm next doing Claire Bradley. Are the experience of colleagues delivering accredited programs included in this research, Harry, or is it the focus of case management? Harry?
Yeah, thank you. So so the short answer is yes, really, that we try and be very expansive, really, across capturing the different types of experiences within probation practitioners, which I think leads me really to make a plug for checking out our website and seeing the publications, which are all open access. Academic publications never move as quickly as one wants, but yeah, that's really a real value to us in terms of the projects, and seeing those different range of experiences, which of course are there depending on where one is working within the system.
Okay.
Lord Fred, can I just come in on that?
Yes, go ahead.
One of the things I wasn't able to pick up on because of time was the threat to the status of accredited programs currently being posed by the intention to downband the grade of program facilitators. We've been running this for quite some time, as you'll know from the Justice Union's parliamentary group.
I do.
And it's a very real and present threat to public safety. You know, and it's our duty as a trade union representing front-face members to keep raising this. You know, it cannot be allowed to happen. And I think the idea, particularly now when sex offending, among other things, is really high in the news, the idea that you can effectively downband the quality delivery, and it ties very much with what Laura was saying about, you know, experience of the person under probation and their relationship with the probation officer is critical. You know, if that starts to crumble at that level, then we're going to see an increase in serious further offences. We are. Yeah. So we'll be campaigning on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to move on rather to Ginny Field. Is the value in utilising local HEIs to, I'm not sure HEIs are, I'm sure everyone else knows, to refresh training for long-standing staff in a multi-agency setting, offering new staff the opportunities to use immersive training and VR to hone their skills?
Higher education institutes, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks. Why aren't these links in place between PDUs and HEIs? Anybody want to comment on that? It'd be nice.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Because there's a skills gap out there. I think in a blog post that you did earlier, I talked about people being prepared for the next stage in their career. And if you've been a PSO, a PO, or have worked in the admin grades, for example, probation, you're just not you're just not equipped to pick up a higher management position where you're having 32 people to manage and run a caseload. It's just, what we're seeing is a manifestation of a lack of investment in training and education. So, going back to my point about returning probation to our communities, I think we want to look at all available conduits to improve education and training. Thank you.
And do you want to say something more about sort of national level qualifications for probation? I mean, if HEIs are doing local training, local refresher training, would that be, I mean, in your view, should that be a nationally accredited type programs?
I think you need to look at what the missing skill sets are from the research. The brilliant research has been undertaken by Harry Anderson and colleagues. Great team you got there, by the way, Harry. Really impressive. And we know there's a shortfall in terms of the training available for new PQIPs. They come through the training, great, but the idea of them picking up 130% caseloads within a few weeks of joining the service is outrageous. It was never that way, and should never be now. So you've got that at the macro level, if you like. But what can a locally based probation service provide to increase skill sets, to help fill the gaps, to make people better equipped? That's where I'm coming from.
Right, thank you. I'm going to read the next one out from Ruth Parks, and this is for all speakers. If we took a utopian methodology approach to the issues facing probation, what would the probation officer role look like to you? E.g., would you go back to the more relationship-based social work approach? I think the answer to that is yes, but what do the other people say?
Yeah. Couldn't agree.
Yeah, which I mean, everyone's nodding their head.
I suppose what I could just say there briefly is one element of our project that I was keenly involved with was studying, really, I suppose, the national level policymakers and the considerable, we should note, I suppose, it's been a little passage of time now, but in many ways it was a considerable achievement to unify probation and not having the thing fall apart on the way. Phil talked about the sort of stitching and so on. That was a considerable achievement. But I think through the a publication called Making Good, which, as I say, like all our publications, are open access, explored was this question of what is what the nature of probation is, its history, its not its competing values, but its overarching and interwoven values and hopes and goals over time. So I suppose I'm slightly speaking, my observations, speaking slightly more for myself than the project overall, would be I think probation by its nature is something that would be very hard to construct de novo and from scratch, and actually a lot of the nature of probation and the richness of it is through its history. And I think that goes back to the point that Phil and others have raised about the probation service going through many upheavals and really massive structural changes, really at minimum really extremely challenges that. So I suppose, again, speaks for myself more than the project team overall. I think we should be, not that anyone is being naively utopian, but I think there are clearly considerable challenges with probation, and there is not an easy solution here. But I think that history is fundamental to probation, and not that anyone is, but not being starry-eyed about its history as well as its present, because I think there are a lot of lessons through its history and through the challenges that there have always been through probation, through the decades in different ways, of whether it was always, as to put it one way, whether it was always as benevolent as it was sometimes presented. And of course, there's a lot more to say there, but that goes to the point that I think there's a lot we can learn from its history. I think I can see that the Chief Probation Officer is hoping to speak, I suppose, by the way, if someone hasn't.
Yes, I was just going to, if we could promote Kim, and then, we can hear from her.
Yeah, please go ahead.
My response to a couple of those questions was going to be, it's possibly more for the service itself, really, to answer.
Who's that? Somebody, does she want to come in?
Hello, and thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can people hear me now?
Kim. Yes.
Now.
Go ahead.
Kim Thornden-Edwards, Chief Probation Officer. I put my hand up in relation to the previous question on training, because I just wanted to kind of feed in a couple of points on that, if I may. I mean, we absolutely recognise the importance of training, particularly as people have referenced earlier, that we have had considerable growth in the organisation, and whilst that's very welcome in terms of bolstering our capacity, it puts the pressure on us to ensure that people are appropriately trained to deliver the services, particularly those who are new. I wanted to address the point about the higher education institutes, and to mention briefly the PQIP training, which is the professional qualification in probation, which all of our trainee probation officers go through. This training is between 15 and 21 months, depending on the level of experience and qualification you come into the training with. We had an extensive review of that training 2 years ago. And we consulted with staff, with trainees, and with higher education institutes. And then we actually built on that feedback to co-design the training with those higher education institutes that deliver that training for us. So we are delivering a new training programme currently on the back of a review, and we will see the results of that as more and more trainees actually come into the system from that training. What I will, we're also, for our probation service officer grade, we're in the process of designing, near final design stages of an apprenticeship qualification, so that we can make sure that we are putting all of our probation service officers through a rigorous and recognised qualification to enable them to be most equipped to do the job. But it isn't just about training, it is also about how they learn on the job, and that does become more difficult when you've got large numbers of new people and less numbers of experienced staff. But we are looking at how we can best explore and create the opportunities for experienced staff to nurture and mentor our new staff. What I would also say in relation to training locally is that we do use local organisations to train our staff. So we will particularly utilise local authorities to do multi-agency training on domestic abuse and safeguarding. So we do have a mixed economy of training, and I just wanted to kind of factor that in. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We're coming towards the end, but I noticed there are different questions in different parts. Some are in chat and some are in Q&A, and I know that my system's a little bit slower. So perhaps I've got one from Mimi Swahili. Shall I read that out? This is a question for you, Ian.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you can see it. I'll read it out. When we talk about next steps and the importance of racial discrimination, there was no mention of gender differences. We know that people who go to female prison estates are fundamentally different and require different support, both in prison and probation. We also know this is greatly impacted by the individual's race and religious background, with Black and Muslim women having the least appropriate support. How will this be included in the future probation? That's a general question. But Ian, do you want to have a go at that first?
Yeah, look, thanks, Liam. It's excellent. And I did focus on the HMIP report into race in probation, but that absolutely does not mean that we are not focusing on all the other issues that are within the service. And we are as committed as Kim Thornden-Edwards and as senior management colleagues to rooting out discrimination in all forms. Let us be quite clear about that. And we've done some great work in that regard. In terms of the population in prisons, well, look, we all agree on one thing, don't we? There are too many people in the prison estate anyway, and there are certainly far too many women in the prison estate. And from the evidence that is widely available, we can see the appalling treatment suffered by certain groups of prisoners. Notably, there have been recent reports about racism in prisons and all the other factors that mean further investment, research and action needs to be taken to try and rehabilitate women, especially from the estate, back into society. So some of the offences that women are put into prison for are absolutely gobsmacking when you see them in comparison to the way other offences are treated and the way men are treated in many respects. Many of our practitioners talk about how harsh the judiciary is on women offenders in proportion. And I know, Lord Fred, I couldn't put you in that category, but I'm pretty sure there are others.
Well, I mean, you could in a way, because I do give women short sentences every now and again, and it's invariably, absolutely invariably, when there have been multiple probation interventions which have fallen away. Yeah. So yes, and you run out of options. So I do that, I'm afraid.
I get that. And I suppose just finally on that, if we can get probation back serving our local communities, we have more chance of working with faith groups and community groups and understanding all the other agencies that we can into understanding what the issues are. It's not easy, Lord Fred, for you. We've heard this from judiciary before. I can't, what else can I do? I've got no other option because programs may not be available. And we need to have a root and branch review of commissioning as well. Because look, transforming rehabilitation failed. The commissioning undertaken, centrally has had mixed results. We need to have a good look at that. What is available? How can it be resourced? And how can we help people who come from different sectors of society? Thank you.
Thank you. Right, well, thank you to Alice Burgess. Is she going? I'm not sure. I'm just looking around, see if there's other questions.
There was one from. Oh, sorry.
I was saying, while you're doing that, can I just comment on the last?
Please
thing?
Go ahead. Yeah.
It seems to me that from a practitioner perspective, representing clients, that one of the difficulties for probation is the quality of information they get about the impacts of racial trauma and particularly intersectional issues. And psychology hasn't caught up with this. So you don't see psychological assessments that factor in the impact of racial trauma. We're not yet seeing programs being developed in ways that specifically address this. And so I think that in a way, we need to step back. We need to make sure that the quality of information that's coming to probation, the risk assessments, actually get much better at factoring in some of the issues that the last speaker raised. Otherwise, we're not going to really be able to tackle them.
I have to say, I think that's a very fair comment. As somebody who's read hundreds, if not thousands, of probation reports, they're quite formulaic, and they don't, as you've just said, comment on what you've just said, racial induced trauma, if you want a better phrase. And the other thing, of course, the very obvious thing to say, of course, the yacht reports are much more extensive because yacht is a much better funded resource. Anybody else? So Kirsty Kitchen, given the consensus on that point, what are the barriers to a return to a more relationship-based social work approach? I think the answer to that's probably money, but I don't know if other people's got a comment.
Yeah. Well, money certainly, Fred, and policy, political policy. Yeah. What is it that politicians want from a probation service and the justice system, come to think of it? What is the priority here? And all too often you go into the pubs, the clubs, and you see debates, lock these people up, throw away the key. It's still a mantra for all too many parts of society. and we got to try and change mindsets as well.
Yeah.
I would just add to that there is often as well, because the way services are sort of packaged up and farmed out, we see even with children, you were talking about the troubled courts pilot. In the case of children, there is a clear statutory duty to provide comprehensive holistic support, and yet where you have cash-strapped local authorities, sometimes that's just sort of seen to be a criminal justice issue, and so it sort of goes into a different mindset, a different trajectory. And I think we need to start seeing criminal justice and social issues as everybody's problem and start working together, which is, of course, what the Criminal Justice Act 2003 and the whole kind of duties under MAPA intended, but it still hasn't quite happened. So I think we need a cultural shift in seeing these things as everybody's issues.
Well, I think I'm going to thank everybody now and move on. So Ian, Laura and Harry, it's been very interesting for me. Lots more questions, and Phil's got another question, but we talk about that one later. So moving on to Jenny George, Director, Justice Value for Money Studies at the National Audit Office.